Well, staying with Ukraine, and President Zelenskyy claims now 2 Chinese men fighting for Russia have been captured in the eastern Donetsk region. Zelenskyy posted a video of one of the captured Chinese men on X and wrote that Kyiv has, quote, information suggesting that there are many more Chinese citizens in the occupier's units. He's demanded a response from Beijing. China is a close Russian ally, but officially maintains a neutral position on the war. Zelenskyy also said that, quote, Russia's involvement of China along with other countries, whether directly or indirectly in this war in Europe, is a clear signal that Putin intends to do anything but end the war. He's looking for ways to continue fighting. This definitely requires a response, he concluded. Let's bring in DW correspondent Jan-Philipp Scholz, who joins us now from Kyiv. Jan-Philipp, Zelenskyy says these are not the only Chinese soldiers fighting for Russia. What do we know about the case at this stage?
Exactly. The involvement of Chinese fighters is certainly a very notable development here in Ukraine. Zelenskyy says the problem goes way beyond the 2 fighters that have been captured. There seems to be evidence that many more Chinese are fighting for Russia. Zelenskyy went as far as to directly accuse the Chinese government of having joined Russia's war against Ukraine. And he also said that there are probably many more fighters involved, but there has to be an investigation first if these fighters are really fighting on a direct order of the Chinese government or if they are mercenaries. This would be embarrassing for the Chinese government as well, but it would probably not cross a legal line.
Zelenskyy has also asked the U.S. to respond and has summoned Chinese diplomats for an explanation. What sort of reaction can we expect here?
Well, he has not only summoned Chinese diplomats, but the Ukrainian foreign minister is trying to directly contact China to seek answers regarding the ongoing investigations. It's very likely that China will deny any direct involvement, and there are a lot of political observers here that say this version might actually be plausible. They say that China is usually very careful, and it's not very likely that it's willing to cross this line and to become a direct party of the conflict. The Western reactions have been quite careful so far as well. The British Prime Minister Starmer said that he needs more information first. He has to analyze the situation and get intelligence advice before he can comment on the situation.
DW correspondent Jan-Philipp Scholz in Kyiv. Thanks so much, Jan.
I'd like to welcome Anders Puck Nielsen, a military analyst at the Royal Danish Defense College, joining us today from Copenhagen. So let's start with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy's claims today that his forces have captured 2 Chinese citizens fighting on the Russian side. Were you surprised to hear that?
Honestly, I was not super surprised to hear that there are Chinese fighting on the Russian side. As long as it's small numbers, then it's probably more individuals joining the Russian army for whatever reason, just as you can find Danes or Germans or Brits or Americans fighting on the Ukrainian side. The more serious thing would be if we see, official Chinese units there in the same way we see North Korean units, for example.
But just to be clear, is it known already which of the 2 these captured soldiers are, whether they're officially from the Chinese military or just Chinese citizens who've been enlisted with Russia?
No, I don't have any knowledge about that. But even if there are Chinese, let's say Chinese observers or so, I think that would be expected. The Russian army is very big. The Chinese army is very big. They, of course, exchange different views and lessons, etc. We also know that the Chinese are trying to help the Russians in different ways without breaking the sanctions too much so that they would be facing consequences from the West.
So put this into perspective for us. How much would you say the Russian army relies on foreign fighters of this kind, potentially?
The Russian army depends on many different sources of personnel. Some of them might be Chinese, others come from other countries. We've seen Nepalese, different African countries, Middle Eastern countries. So they definitely recruit whoever they can get, and then they try to find some kind of function that they can fill. The Russian army is really struggling to find the personnel they need for the fight, especially because it's become a war that where there is so heavy attrition and the casualty numbers are just so big. So they are really looking wherever they can, and probably what you showed before about the raid at the gym in Moscow might also be an example of how they're trying to find maybe foreign workers in Russia that they can somehow try to push into the army.
Even foreign workers then in these roundups?
Absolutely, that's what they do, especially from Central Asia, for example. They try to, in different ways, press charges against them for whatever kind of petty crimes, and then try to push them into the army because that can get them out of the legal trouble. These kinds of things, we see many examples of that.
Well, that is exactly why I'm asking, because as you've mentioned, we've heard that Russian President Vladimir Putin is calling up 160,000 men as part of a fresh conscription effort. The official line, of course, not that they're going to be sent to the battlefield, but I'm curious for your perspective here, how much of a difference it could make in Ukraine.
I don't think it's directly connected to the war in Ukraine. It's more connected to the fact that the Russian army in general is growing these years. They are trying to increase the number of soldiers they have, and some of those will be conscripts, and that's why we see this trend where the numbers are bigger and bigger year over year. And of course, some of them will end up in Ukraine because they sign a contract, either because they are they do it voluntarily or because they are forced in different ways to do it. So we do see those kinds of things, and but I would be careful to say that these 160,000 new conscripts are in any way connected to the plans of a new offensive in Ukraine or something like that, because it's more part of a long-term trend.
Okay, one last question for you. Ukraine's been going into Russian territory, of course, Kursk. Now Zelenskyy also confirming that they do have soldiers in Belgorod. Do you see that as a strategy with the potential to pay off, or is this a drain on resources that could be used better elsewhere?
I think it's a deliberate Ukrainian strategy to try to extend the front line, make the front line longer, force the Russians to spread out. And I think it's been paying off quite well. It has definitely eased the pressure on the front line inside Ukraine, especially in the Donetsk region. So I do think it's paying off. And I think we need to just understand that the front line is just longer now. And this is a part of the front line that will probably continue to be the case.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on DW with your insights. We've been speaking with Anders Puck Nielsen.